Elena Vasquez has been hiding bruises behind long sleeves and fake smiles for 8 months, counting tips toward her $2,000 escape fund, until Korean Mafia boss Kim Tae-hyun notices her flinch when her ex-boyfriend Marcus walks into the diner. He sees the fear, recognizes the signs, and in one night changes everything. But Tae-hyun is no ordinary customer, and his protection comes with consequences Elena never imagined. At 24, Elena balanced the worn plastic trays of Rosie's diner with the relentless demands of her nursing courses at Metro Community College. The night shift paid better, and she needed every dollar. Her mother's dialysis treatments cost $400 a week, and Elena's secret savings account held exactly $1,847. She needed $2,000 to disappear completely, to take her mother somewhere Marcus could never find them. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her scrubs covered the finger-shaped bruises on her upper arms. She was exhausted but determined, driven by a vision of freedom that felt just weeks away. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the chipped linoleum and cracked vinyl booths. Elena moved efficiently between tables, her smile automatic and practiced. She had perfected the art of invisible survival, of being helpful but forgettable, of earning tips without drawing attention. The late-night crowd was predictable. Truckers, insomniacs, and the occasional well-dressed customer who seemed out of place in the worn-down establishment. Kim Tae-hyun had been coming in for 3 weeks, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in booth 7 by the window. He was impossible to ignore, a study in controlled intensity dressed in expensive suits that seemed too formal for a place like Rosie's. Tonight he wore charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, with a subtle pattern that probably cost more than Elena made in 2 months. His features were sharp and sculpted, dark hair swept back perfectly, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. When he looked at people, it was with the focus of someone accustomed to reading threats and opportunities. His presence created a strange weight in the usually casual atmosphere, like a predator among sheep who had forgotten to be afraid. Elena approached his table with coffee pot in hand, notepad ready. "What can I get you tonight, Mr. Kim?" she asked, using the name from his credit card. "Coffee, black," he replied, his English precise and unaccented. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She poured the coffee, aware of his attention but trying to remain professional. He always left a $20 tip on a $3 order, which meant she never complained about the scrutiny. The bell above the door chimed, and Elena looked up automatically. Her blood turned to ice. Marcus stood in the doorway, scanning the diner with the predatory focus she knew too well. He was looking for her. Elena's hands began to shake, and the coffee pot slipped from her grasp, shattering against the floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. "Sorry," she whispered, dropping to her knees to clean up the mess, desperate to avoid Marcus's attention. Her breathing became shallow and quick. Kim Tae-hyun noticed everything. The way Elena's face went white when the man entered. The way her entire body tensed, like prey recognizing a predator. The way she immediately made herself smaller, less visible. He observed the newcomer with cold calculation. Mid-30s, poorly dressed, cheap cologne failing to mask the scent of stale beer and cigarettes. The man's eyes found Elena on the floor, and his expression shifted into something ugly and possessive. Marcus approached the booth where Elena knelt among the broken ceramic. Well, working late again, baby," he said, his voice carrying the false sweetness that preceded violence. Elena stood slowly, her movements careful and controlled. "I'm at work, Marcus. You can't be here." Her voice was steady, but Tae-hyun could see the fear in the rigid line of her shoulders, the way she positioned herself for escape. From where he sat, Tae-hyun watched the interaction with growing interest. This was not a casual conversation between former lovers. This was a predator circling wounded prey. Marcus reached out and grabbed Elena's wrist, his fingers finding the exact spots where bruises already existed. She winced but didn't pull away, knowing better than to escalate. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his grip tightening. "About your little savings account. About how you think you can just leave." Elena's face went even paler. She had been so careful, so secretive about the money. If he knew about that, then her escape plan was compromised. Taehyun set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden tension of the diner. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus looked over, irritated by the interruption. "Yeah, what?" he snapped. Taehyun stood slowly, his full height and presence becoming immediately apparent. "You're disturbing other customers," he said simply. His tone was conversational, but there was something underneath it that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. Something cold and final and absolutely certain. Marcus released Elena's wrist and tried to puff himself up. "This is between me and my girlfriend, old man. Mind your own business." But his voice lacked conviction. There was something about the well-dressed stranger that triggered every survival instinct Marcus possessed. The man radiated danger the way a fire radiated heat, impossible to ignore or misinterpret. Taehyun smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I am minding my business," he replied. "This is where I come to enjoy quiet coffee. You are disrupting that quiet. I suggest you leave. Now." The words were spoken softly, almost conversationally, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. This was not a request or a threat. It was simply a statement of what would happen. Marcus looked between Taehyun and Elena, his small brain trying to calculate odds he didn't understand. The stranger was clearly expensive, clearly connected, clearly not someone to mess with. But Elena was his, and he wasn't about to be intimidated. "You don't know who you're messing with, pal." Taehyun reached into his jacket and placed a business card on the table. His movements were careful and deliberate, allowing Marcus to see that he was armed, but making no aggressive motion. "Actually," he said quietly, "you don't know who you're messing with. But you're about to learn. I'll give you 10 seconds to walk out that door. After that, my patience expires, and you won't enjoy what happens next." Something in Taehyun's voice, in his absolute stillness, finally penetrated Marcus's alcohol-fueled bravado. He looked into those dark, calculating eyes and saw his own death reflected back. Without another word, he turned and walked quickly toward the door, practically running by the time he reached the parking lot. Elena stood frozen, coffee still dripping from the broken pieces at her feet. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. A stranger had made Marcus back down without raising his voice, without even standing from his booth until the very end. She looked at Kim Taehyun with new understanding. This was not just a well-dressed customer. This was someone with real power, real danger, real capability. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, his eyes examining her wrist where Marcus had grabbed her. Elena shook her head, though they both knew it was a lie. The bruises were already darkening. "You should sit down," Taehyun said, gesturing to the booth across from his. Elena hesitated, then slid into the worn vinyl seat. Her legs felt unsteady. "He will return," Taehyun observed, his voice matter-of-fact. "Men like that always do. They see women as possessions, not people." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for a napkin to clean up the remaining coffee. "I know," she whispered. "I've been saving money to leave, to take my mother somewhere safe. But he found out about the account. I don't know how, but he knows." Taehyun studied her for a long moment, taking in the fading bruises barely visible under her makeup, the careful way she moved, the exhaustion that went deeper than just working double shifts. "How much do you need?" he asked. Elena looked up, confused. "To disappear completely. To be safe. How much money would it take?" $2,000, she said automatically, then immediately regretted sharing the information with a stranger. "Maybe more. I need to pay for my mother's treatments. Find us a place to live somewhere he can't find us. But even if I had the money, Marcus has friends. People who owe him favors. Running isn't really an option anymore." Taehyun reached into his jacket again and withdrew a leather wallet. He counted out $2,100 bills and placed them on the table between them. Elena stared at the money in shock. "That's $2,000, she said stupidly. He nodded. "Why would you give this to me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you work 2 jobs to support your sick mother. I know you've been planning your escape for months. I know you return extra change when customers overpay, which tells me you're honest. And I know that in about an hour, when your shift ends, that man will be waiting for you in the parking lot." Elena felt tears threatening. The money represented freedom, safety, everything she had been working toward. But nothing was ever free, especially not from dangerous strangers in expensive suits. "What do you want in return?" she asked quietly. Right now, nothing, Taehyun said. Take the money. Disappear tonight. But when you're ready, when you realize that running only works if you have somewhere safe to run to, call me. He placed a business card next to the money. The card was simple, elegant, with only a phone number and a single Korean character. Elena looked at the card, then at the money, then at the man who had just offered her everything she needed. This felt like a trap, but it also felt like her only chance. Marcus would escalate tonight. He always did when someone challenged him. And she had seen the calculation in his eyes when he looked at her. She was worth money to him now, not just as a possession, but as a commodity. Why are you helping me? She asked. Taehyun considered the question for a moment. Because I have experience with men who hurt women, he said finally. And because everyone deserves a chance to be safe. His voice carried a weight of history, of old pain carefully contained. Elena reached for the money with shaking hands. If I take this, I owe you. Nothing is free. She needed to understand the terms, the price, the trap she might be walking into. Taehyun shook his head. You owe me nothing. But when you discover that geography is not protection, when you realize that men like Marcus have long reach and longer memories, remember that some cages are safer than others. The words sent a chill through Elena, but she took the money anyway. She folded the bills carefully and slipped them into her uniform pocket along with the business card. Thank you, she said, though the words felt inadequate. Whatever this was, whatever price would eventually come due, it was better than what waited for her in the parking lot. Taehyun finished his coffee and left his usual $20 tip. Be safe, Elena, he said as he stood to leave. And remember, there are worse things than owing favors to dangerous men. Being helpless against them is one of those things. Elena finished her shift in a haze of nervous energy, the $2,000 and business card burning like secrets in her uniform pocket. Every customer who walked through the door made her jump, expecting Marcus to return with reinforcements or worse intentions. When her replacement arrived at 6 a.m., Elena grabbed her purse and headed for the employee exit, avoiding the main parking lot where Marcus might be waiting. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant promise of rain. Elena walked quickly toward the bus stop, her sneakers silent on the damp pavement. She kept looking over her shoulder, but the streets were empty except for early commuters and delivery trucks. Maybe Marcus had really been scared off. Maybe the stranger's intervention had been enough. But Elena knew better. Marcus didn't stay scared. He got angry, and when Marcus got angry, people got hurt. Her apartment building was a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that polite people called transitional. The rent was cheap because the plumbing was unreliable and the heating barely worked, but it was clean and Elena had deadbolts on the door. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, fumbling for her keys while listening for footsteps behind her. The hallway was quiet, smelling of disinfectant and other people's cooking. Elena reached her door and froze. The wood around the deadbolt was splintered, fresh gouges showing where someone had forced entry. Her blood ran cold. The door hung slightly ajar, darkness visible through the crack. Elena pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, ready to call 911, but a voice from inside the apartment stopped her. Well, look who decided to come home, Marcus called out, his tone falsely cheerful. Get in here, baby. We need to have that talk. Elena's hands shook as she pushed the door open. Her small apartment had been systematically destroyed. Couch cushions slashed open, books scattered across the floor, her mother's photographs torn from their frames. Marcus sat in her kitchen chair, a beer in his hand and her laptop open on the small table. He had found everything. Her bank statements, her class schedules, her mother's medical records. You've been busy, he said conversationally, taking a long drink from the bottle. Very busy. Planning your little escape. Saving up your pennies, thinking you could just walk away from me. He stood slowly, setting the beer down with deliberate precision. Elena noticed the fresh scratches on his knuckles, the way his pupils were dilated. He was high on something that made him feel invincible. Marcus, please, Elena started, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. Please what, Elena? Please don't be mad that you've been lying to me for months. Please don't be upset that you were planning to disappear without a word. He moved closer, and Elena could smell alcohol and methamphetamine on his breath, a combination that turned him from merely violent to completely unpredictable. I found your little savings account, he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. $1,800. That's a lot of money for a diner waitress. Makes me think you've been holding out on me in other ways, too. Elena backed toward the door, but Marcus was quicker. He grabbed her arm with bruising force, his fingers finding the exact spots where he had hurt her before. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his grip tightening until Elena gasped. You're going to withdraw every penny from that account. And then you're going to come with me to meet some friends of mine. They're always looking for pretty girls to work off debts, and I owe them quite a bit of money. Consider it your contribution to our relationship. Elena's mind raced with terror. She knew what Marcus meant, knew the kind of friends he had, knew what working off debts meant for girls who disappeared into that world. No, she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. I won't do it. You can't make me. Marcus laughed, a sound without humor or warmth. Can't make you. That's funny, baby. Because here's what you don't understand. I know where your mother gets her dialysis. I know which days, which times, which route she takes to get there. I know where your little nursing school is, what time your classes start, which professors you're trying to impress. You think you can run from me, but I own every piece of your life. The threat to her mother broke something inside Elena. Marcus had never directly threatened her family before, had always focused his violence on Elena herself. But now he was talking about expanding his reach, about making her mother pay for Elena's defiance. That crossed a line Elena couldn't tolerate. You're insane, she whispered, genuine fear making her voice shake. My mother has nothing to do with this. She's sick, Marcus. She needs those treatments to live. If you hurt her, I'll call the police. I'll tell them everything. Marcus's expression shifted into something ugly and predatory. You'll tell them what, exactly? That your boyfriend hits you sometimes. That you've been lying to everyone about our relationship. That you've been secretly planning to abandon your sick mother to run away with stolen money. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. Who do you think they'll believe, Elena? A respected member of the community with a steady job, or a lying waitress with a criminal boyfriend? Elena realized with dawning horror that Marcus had thought this through. He had been planning this confrontation, preparing for her eventual attempt to leave. The friends he mentioned, the knowledge of her mother's schedule, the threat to frame her for theft, this wasn't spontaneous violence. This was calculated control. Her hand found the business card in her pocket, the elegant paper now damp with sweat. The Korean stranger's words echoed in her memory. When you realize that running only works if you have somewhere safe to run to, call me. Elena had never felt less safe in her life. I need to use the bathroom, she said quietly, hoping Marcus would give her a moment of privacy. He laughed and shook his head. Nice try, baby. You're not leaving my sight until we're done here. But his attention shifted to his phone, which was buzzing with an incoming call. He answered it without loosening his grip on Elena's arm. Yeah, Jimmy, what's up? He said into the phone. His expression changed as he listened to whatever Jimmy was telling him. Elena caught fragments of the conversation. Something about money, about time running out, about people getting impatient. Marcus's free hand clenched into a fist as he spoke. The conversation gave Elena the distraction she needed. While Marcus argued with Jimmy about payments and deadlines, Elena slowly worked her hand into her pocket and pulled out the business card and her phone. The card had only a phone number and a single Korean character, nothing else. Elena had no idea who Kim Tae-hyun really was or what calling him would cost her, but she knew it couldn't be worse than what Marcus had planned. She typed the number into her phone as quietly as possible, her thumb hovering over the call button. This was the moment of no return. Once she made this call, she would be accepting help from a dangerous stranger, entering a world she didn't understand. But Marcus was already dragging her into a world of violence and exploitation. At least with the stranger, she had a choice. Elena pressed call. The phone rang once before a familiar voice answered. Elena, the voice said calmly. I was wondering when you would call. Tell me where you are. Marcus was still arguing with Jimmy, his back turned to Elena as he paced around her destroyed living room. My apartment, Elena whispered into the phone. He's here. He's going to hurt my mother if I don't go with him. Please, I don't know what else to do. Stay on the line, Tae-hyun said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority she remembered from the diner. Do not hang up. We will be there in 8 minutes. Until then, stay calm and keep him talking. Elena looked at Marcus, who was now shouting at Jimmy about respect and payment schedules. 8 minutes felt like a lifetime when you were trapped with a violent man who had nothing left to lose. But for the first time in months, Elena felt a spark of hope. Help was coming, even if she didn't fully understand the price. 7 minutes later, Elena heard the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside her building. Marcus heard it too, his argument with Jimmy forgotten as he moved to the window. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking down at the street. Elena couldn't see what he was seeing, but she could hear car doors slamming and the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Someone knocked on the apartment door with calm, measured patience. "Marcus, this is Kim Tae-hyun," a voice said through the thin wood. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Please open the door so we can discuss this matter like civilized people." Marcus grabbed Elena roughly, pulling her against him as a human shield. He had produced a knife from somewhere, the blade pressed against her throat. "I'm not afraid of your Asian friends," he called out. "This is between me and Elena, and you need to mind your own business." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of the door being opened with surgical precision. The deadbolt Elena had thought was secure might as well have been made of paper. 3 men entered the apartment, moving with the fluid coordination of professionals. Elena recognized Tae-hyun immediately, though he looked different now. Gone was the customer in the expensive suit. This was someone else entirely, someone cold and lethal and absolutely certain of his capabilities. "Mr. Marcus," Tae-hyun said pleasantly, as if he were commenting on the weather, "you seem to have made an error in judgment. That woman is under my protection now, which means harming her would be very bad for your health. I suggest you release her immediately, and we can discuss your debt situation in a more productive manner." Marcus pressed the knife harder against Elena's throat, a thin line of blood appearing where the blade met skin. "I don't owe you anything," he snarled. "And Elena belongs to me, not some foreign gangster who thinks he can walk into my city and take what's mine." Tae-hyun's expression didn't change, but Elena could feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "Foreign gangster," he repeated thoughtfully. "That's interesting. You know, Marcus, I was born in Los Angeles. I probably have more claim to being American than you do, but I found that small minds often resort to racism when they're afraid." One of Tae-hyun's associates moved with lightning speed, disarming Marcus and restraining him before Elena could even process what was happening. The knife clattered to the floor, and Elena found herself free for the first time in hours. She stumbled away from Marcus, her hand going to her throat where the blade had been. Tae-hyun caught her gently, his touch careful and reassuring. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "Are you injured?" Elena shook her head, though her throat stung where Marcus had cut her. Tae-hyun examined the wound with the efficiency of someone who had seen violence before. "Superficial," he diagnosed. "It will heal cleanly." Elena looked at Marcus, who was now held immobile by 2 men who seemed capable of breaking him in half without effort. The bravado and aggression were gone, replaced by the desperate fear of someone who finally understood how far out of his depth he had gone. "What happens now?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Tae-hyun considered the question for a moment, his dark eyes studying Marcus with clinical detachment. "That depends on several factors," he said finally. "Whether Mr. Marcus is willing to accept that his relationship with you is permanently concluded. Whether he understands the consequences of threatening you or your mother ever again. Whether he has the intelligence to disappear from your life completely and voluntarily." Marcus tried to speak, but one of Tae-hyun's men applied pressure to his shoulder, and he gasped instead. Tae-hyun walked over to Elena's destroyed laptop, glancing at the financial information Marcus had discovered. "This debt you mentioned to your friend Jimmy," he said conversationally. "How much do you owe, and to whom?" 23,000, Marcus wheezed when the pressure on his shoulder eased slightly. "To the Kozlov brothers. For gambling and, pharmaceutical purchases." Tae-hyun nodded thoughtfully. "The Kozlov brothers. I know them. Unpleasant men, but practical. They understand business." He turned to Elena. "Pack what you need," he said gently. "You won't be staying here tonight. Or any night. This place is no longer safe." Elena looked around her destroyed apartment, at the life Marcus had systematically torn apart. There wasn't much worth saving anyway. She gathered a few clothes, her mother's photographs, and her nursing textbooks. Everything else could be replaced or had already been ruined. When she emerged from the bedroom with a single suitcase, Marcus was gone. Only Tae-hyun remained, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking rapidly in Korean, his tone businesslike and efficient. Elena caught fragments that sounded like numbers and locations, but nothing she could understand. "Where did you take him?" she asked when Taehyun finished his call. He looked at her for a moment, as if deciding how much truth she could handle. "Mr. Marcus is being relocated," he said finally. "Somewhere he can consider his life choices and their consequences. Whether he survives that consideration period depends entirely on how quickly he learns from his mistakes." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She had called for help, and help had arrived. But the man who had just saved her life was clearly capable of taking one just as easily. The business card in her pocket suddenly felt heavier, weighted with implications she was only beginning to understand. As they left the apartment building, Elena noticed that Marcus's car was no longer in the parking lot where he had left it. In its place was a smoking crater and the twisted remains of what might once have been a vehicle. The explosion had been controlled and precise, destroying only the intended target while leaving the surrounding area untouched. Elena stared at the wreckage, understanding finally settling over her like a heavy blanket. This was what protection looked like in Taehyun's world. This was the price of safety, the cost of calling that number. She was no longer just Elena Vasquez, nursing student and diner waitress. She was under the protection of someone who could make cars explode and people disappear, someone who commanded respect through fear and capability. The question now was what that protection would cost her, and whether she was strong enough to pay the price. Taehyun's black sedan moved through the city streets with the smooth silence of expensive engineering. Elena sat in the passenger seat, her suitcase in the trunk, watching familiar neighborhoods disappear behind tinted windows. The interior smelled of leather and subtle cologne, a sharp contrast to the chaos and violence of her apartment. She kept touching the small bandage on her throat where Marcus had cut her, a reminder that her old life had ended the moment she made that phone call. They drove for 20 minutes through increasingly upscale areas until Taehyun pulled into the parking garage beneath a sleek building in the financial district. The structure rose 40 stories into the evening sky, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like a dark mirror. Elena had passed this building countless times on her way to nursing school, never imagining she would be inside it. The elevator required a key card to access the upper floors. Taehyun's card granted them entry to the 38th floor, where the doors opened directly into a private restaurant that Elena was certain had never appeared on any public directory. The space was elegant and intimate, designed for conversations that required absolute discretion. Traditional Korean elements blended seamlessly with modern luxury. Dark wood panels carved with intricate patterns lined the walls, while contemporary light fixtures cast warm pools of illumination across low tables surrounded by silk cushions. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, the lights stretching toward the horizon like scattered diamonds. The air carried the faint scent of sandalwood and jasmine, expensive and calming. Elena felt overwhelmed by the display of wealth and refinement. This was a world she had only glimpsed in magazines or movies, a level of prosperity so far removed from her experience that it felt almost fictional. Her nursing student scrubs and discount store sneakers seemed shabby and inappropriate in such surroundings. "Please, sit," Taehyun said, gesturing toward a table positioned to take advantage of the spectacular view. Elena settled onto the silk cushions, acutely aware of how out of place she must look. Taehyun moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in luxury, pouring tea from an elaborate ceramic service that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. The tea was unlike anything Elena had ever tasted, complex and subtle with hints of flowers and smoke. She held the delicate cup carefully, afraid of damaging something so obviously valuable. Taehyun sat across from her, his expensive suit perfectly pressed despite the evening's events, his dark eyes studying her with the same calculating intensity she remembered from the diner. "You have questions," he observed, settling back against his cushions with fluid grace. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. The magnitude of what had happened in her apartment was still sinking in. Marcus was gone, his car destroyed, her old life effectively terminated in a matter of minutes. "Ask them," Taehyun encouraged. "Who are you?" Elena managed finally. "Really, I mean, not just your name, But what kind of business requires this level of? She gestured around the restaurant, security, and resources. Taehyun considered his answer carefully. I manage investments and business relationships for several Korean families with interests in this city, he said. Some of those interests are traditional and documented. Others are more pragmatic in nature. I ensure that agreements are honored, that conflicts are resolved efficiently, and that people who matter to my employers remain safe and productive. Elena understood that he was describing organized crime in the most diplomatic terms possible. The euphemisms didn't disguise the reality that she had called a dangerous man for help, and that help had come at the cost of entering his world. So she started, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question politely. I'm what people in movies call a mafia boss. Yes, Taehyun said with a slight smile. Though the reality is considerably more bureaucratic than Hollywood suggests. Most of my work involves spreadsheets and contract negotiations, not dramatic confrontations. Tonight was unusual in its directness. Elena set down her teacup, her hands trembling slightly. Why did you help me? You could have just ignored what was happening at the diner. You could have minded your own business when Marcus showed up. Instead, you gave me money, came to my apartment, saved my life. What do you want in return? Taehyun refilled her teacup, his movements precise and graceful. What I want, Elena, is to offer you a position. A job, if you prefer conventional terms, though the arrangement would be somewhat more comprehensive than typical employment. His voice took on a formal, businesslike tone that Elena recognized as the prelude to negotiation. What kind of position? Elena asked, though she suspected the answer would be complicated. I need someone with medical training, Taehyun began. Someone discreet, trustworthy, and intelligent. My associates occasionally require medical attention that cannot be obtained through conventional channels. You would provide that care, ask no questions, and maintain absolute silence about anything you see or hear. Elena felt her stomach tighten. Treating criminals who couldn't go to hospitals meant treating people injured during illegal activities. Gunshot wounds, stab injuries, the kind of trauma that came with violence. Is that all? She asked quietly. No, Taehyun admitted. You would also serve as my personal companion. You would live in accommodations I provide, accompany me to business functions when required, and present yourself as my partner in both professional and social contexts. You would be available when I need your presence, your counsel, or simply your company. Elena's mind raced with the implications. Companion could mean many things, from simple escort to something far more intimate and binding. What exactly does companion mean? She asked directly. Are you talking about? She paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing, personal services beyond medical care. Taehyun met her gaze steadily. I am talking about loyalty, trust, and exclusive availability, he said. Whether our relationship becomes intimate is entirely your choice. I have no interest in coercion or reluctant participation. What I require is your presence, your discretion, and your commitment to the arrangement. Elena appreciated his directness, but she needed to understand the full scope of what he was proposing. What would you pay for this arrangement? And what would happen if I wanted to leave? The compensation would be $120,000 annually, Taehyun said without hesitation. In addition, your mother's medical expenses would be covered completely, your nursing school tuition would be paid, and you would be provided with a luxury apartment in a secure building. You would also have access to a car, appropriate clothing, and all necessary expenses. Elena's breath caught. The amount was staggering, more money than she could have earned in 5 years of nursing. Her mother's dialysis alone cost $20,000 annually, and nursing school was another $15,000. The financial security he was offering would transform not just her life, but her mother's as well. As for leaving, Taehyun continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, that would depend on the circumstances. If you completed your nursing degree and wished to pursue a conventional career, we could discuss terms. If you betrayed my trust, shared confidential information, or endangered my business through carelessness or disloyalty, the consequences would be severe. How severe? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Loss of all financial support, immediate termination of your mother's medical coverage, and potential exposure to Marcus's associates, who I can assure you have not forgotten about you, Taehyun said calmly. I would also ensure that you found employment in this city extremely difficult to obtain. I prefer cooperation to coercion, Elena, but I protect my interests absolutely. Elena felt the weight of the decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. Taehyun was offering her everything she needed to save her mother's life and build a secure future, but the price was her independence and her entrance into a world of criminality and violence. She would be trading one form of captivity for another, but this cage would be gilded and comfortable. "You're asking me to become your property," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to become my partner in a mutually beneficial arrangement," Taehyun corrected. "You would have status, protection, financial security, and the opportunity to use your medical skills in challenging situations. In exchange, I would have your loyalty, your discretion, and your presence when I need it." Elena looked out at the city lights, thinking about her mother hooked to a dialysis machine 3 times a week, about the mounting medical bills, about Marcus's threats that might extend beyond tonight's intervention. She thought about nursing school, about her dream of helping people, about the impossibility of achieving any of it without resources she didn't have. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. "Then I will arrange for your protection until Marcus's situation is permanently resolved," Taehyun said. "I will ensure you have enough money to relocate safely, and I will wish you well in your future endeavors. But I cannot offer ongoing protection or support without an ongoing relationship." Elena realized that her choice was not between freedom and captivity, but between different forms of dependency. Marcus had shown her that independence was an illusion for someone without power or resources. At least with Taehyun, she would have status and security along with her constraints. "How long would this arrangement last?" she asked. "Initially, 2 years," Taehyun replied. "If we are both satisfied with the relationship, we could extend or modify the terms. If not, you would leave with enough resources to establish yourself independently." Elena took a sip of tea, using the moment to gather her thoughts. She was 24 years old, trapped between an abusive ex-boyfriend and a criminal offering her safety in exchange for loyalty. Her mother needed expensive medical care that Elena couldn't afford on a waitress's salary. Her nursing degree represented years of hope and effort that would be meaningless if she couldn't finish the program. Taehyun waited patiently while Elena weighed her options. He seemed to understand that she needed time to process the magnitude of what he was offering and what he was asking in return. The silence stretched between them, filled only with the distant sound of traffic far below. "If I agree," Elena said finally, "I want certain guarantees. I want my mother's medical care secured regardless of what happens between us. I want to finish nursing school on schedule. And I want your word that you will never force physical intimacy." "Agreed," Taehyun said without hesitation. "Your mother's care will be guaranteed for life, regardless of our relationship status. You will complete your nursing degree with full support. And I give you my word that any intimate relationship between us will be entirely your choice and proceed at your pace." Elena looked at him across the low table, this dangerous man who had saved her life and was now offering her a future she could never have achieved alone. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was an opportunity disguised as an ultimatum, a chance for security wrapped in silk and cologne and expensive tea. "I accept," Elena said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the decision. Taehyun smiled, the expression transforming his austere features into something almost warm. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek smartphone, placing it on the table between them. "This phone connects directly to me," he said. "Use it for all communication. My staff will contact you tomorrow to arrange your living situation and academic transfers. You start your new position immediately." Elena picked up the phone, feeling its weight in her hands. It was heavier than it looked, like a symbol of the commitment she had just made. She was no longer Elena Vasquez, struggling nursing student and diner waitress. She was Taehyun's partner, his companion, his investment in a future that would be unlike anything she had ever imagined. "Welcome to your new life," Taehyun said, raising his teacup in a silent toast. Elena touched her cup to his, sealing the arrangement with the subtle click of expensive ceramic. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled with possibilities and dangers she was only beginning to understand. 3 months later, Elena stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment, watching the morning sun paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The view never failed to amaze her, even after weeks of waking up to it. Far below, people moved through their ordinary lives. unaware of the woman 30 floors above who lived in a world most could never imagine. The apartment Taehyun had provided was a study in understated luxury. Warm hardwood floors stretched across open spaces filled with carefully chosen furniture that managed to be both beautiful and comfortable. The kitchen featured granite countertops and professional-grade appliances that Elena was still learning to use. Her bedroom overlooked the river, with a king-sized bed dressed in Egyptian cotton sheets and a walk-in closet filled with clothes that cost more than her previous annual income. Elena had adapted to her new life with surprising ease. The financial security that had once seemed impossible was now her daily reality. Her mother's medical bills were paid automatically, without Elena having to count tips or work double shifts to cover treatments. The relief of that burden alone had transformed Elena's entire existence. She finished her coffee and gathered her medical bag, a leather case filled with supplies that would make any emergency room jealous. Today she had 2 stops before her afternoon nursing classes. The first was a routine wound check for one of Taehyun's associates who had suffered a knife injury during what he diplomatically called a business disagreement. The second was a new patient, someone who needed surgical stitches but couldn't risk a hospital visit. Elena had discovered that she was uniquely suited for this kind of work. Her nursing training provided the medical knowledge, while her experience with Marcus had taught her to read violence in men's faces and movements. She could assess injuries, provide treatment, and ask no questions while maintaining the calm professionalism that made dangerous men trust her discretion. The first patient lived in a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place where no one would suspect criminal activity. Elena checked his healing knife wound, changed his dressing, and prescribed antibiotics to prevent infection. He paid her in cash and thanked her with genuine gratitude. These men respected her competence and treated her with a deference that had everything to do with her association with Taehyun. The second patient required more extensive care. A deep laceration on his shoulder that needed careful suturing and would require ongoing monitoring. Elena worked efficiently, her hands steady as she cleaned and closed the wound. The man never asked her name or offered his own. In Taehyun's world, anonymity was often a kindness. By the time Elena finished her medical rounds and completed her afternoon classes, the sun was setting behind the city skyline. She returned to her apartment exhausted but satisfied with her day's work. Medical school was progressing smoothly with the financial pressure removed, and she was discovering a talent for trauma care that surprised her professors. Elena had just changed into comfortable clothes when she heard her private elevator chiming. Only one person had access to her apartment without permission. Taehyun stepped into her living space, carrying bags from an upscale Korean restaurant, the rich aromas of bulgogi and kimchi filling the air. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the food on her dining table with the easy grace that characterized all his movements. Elena realized this had become a routine over the past month. Taehyun would arrive unexpectedly with food, and they would share quiet dinners overlooking the city. The conversations were never about business or the terms of their arrangement. Instead, they talked about books, current events, Elena's progress in school, or the cultural differences between his Korean heritage and her Mexican-American background. "How was your day?" Taehyun asked as they opened containers of perfectly prepared food. Elena told him about her patients without naming names or sharing specifics, maintaining the discretion that was fundamental to her role. Taehyun listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his understanding of medical procedures. "You're gifted at this work," he observed, watching Elena's animated description of a complex suturing technique. "Your patients trust you completely, which is remarkable given their natural suspicion of outsiders." Elena felt a warm flush of pride at his praise. She had worked hard to earn that trust and recognition. The conversation shifted to Elena's nursing classes, where she was excelling in trauma care and emergency medicine. Her professors had noticed her unusual composure during high-pressure situations and her ability to think clearly when others panicked. Elena knew this came from months of treating injuries while dangerous men watched her work, but she couldn't share that insight with her academic advisors. Taehyun was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions about her studies and remembering details from previous conversations. Elena found herself looking forward to these evening talks, enjoying the intellectual stimulation of discussing her work with someone who appreciated the complexity of what she was learning. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows provided a spectacular view of the city lights. Elena curled up on the leather couch while Taehyun sat in the adjacent chair, both of them comfortable with the companionable silence that had developed between them. Elena had been dreading this moment for weeks, but it couldn't be avoided any longer. "Taehyun, I need to tell you something about my mother's condition," she said quietly. He immediately gave her his full attention, his dark eyes concerned. "The doctors think she may need a kidney transplant within the next year. The dialysis isn't working as well as it used to." Taehyun leaned forward, his expression serious. "What do the doctors recommend?" he asked. Elena explained the complexities of organ transplantation, the waiting lists, the astronomical costs, the need for ongoing immunosuppressive therapy. Even with good insurance, a kidney transplant could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Consider it handled," Taehyun said simply. Elena stared at him in shock. "You can't just say consider it handled about organ transplantation. It's not something you can buy or arrange through connections." Taehyun's smile was gentle but confident. "Elena, you underestimate the reach of my resources. If your mother needs a kidney, she will receive the best possible care from the best possible doctors. Money is not a limitation." Elena felt tears threatening as the magnitude of his commitment settled over her. This went far beyond their original agreement, far beyond the compensation they had negotiated. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "My mother isn't part of our arrangement. You don't owe her anything." Taehyun stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. "Your mother's well-being is your well-being," he said quietly. "Your peace of mind is valuable to me, more valuable than you might realize." His voice carried a weight of emotion that Elena had never heard before. She joined him at the window, standing close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne and see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and responsibility. "You care about more than just our business arrangement, don't you?" she said softly. It wasn't really a question. Taehyun turned to face her, his carefully maintained emotional distance cracking slightly. "I care about your happiness, Elena. I care about your success in school, your relationship with your mother, your sense of safety and security." Our arrangement began as business, but somewhere along the way it became something more personal. Elena felt her heart racing as she processed his admission. Over the past 3 months, she had begun to see glimpses of the man beneath the controlled exterior. The way he remembered her favorite foods, his interest in her studies, his gentle questions about her childhood and dreams. She had been fighting her growing attraction to him, telling herself it was just gratitude for his protection and generosity. Standing this close to him in the soft lighting of her apartment, Elena realized her feelings had evolved far beyond gratitude. She was drawn to his intelligence, his quiet confidence, the unexpected tenderness he showed when he thought no one was watching. The danger that surrounded him should have been frightening, but instead it made him seem strong and capable of protecting the things he valued. Taehyun reached out slowly, giving Elena time to pull away if she wanted. His fingers traced the faint scar on her throat where Marcus had cut her, a reminder of the night that had brought them together. "This should never have happened to you," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "No one should ever hurt you again." Elena covered his hand with hers, feeling the warmth of his skin and the controlled strength in his fingers. "You saved my life that night," she said. "Not just from Marcus, but from a future of fear and limitation. I'll never be able to repay that." "You don't owe me repayment," Taehyun replied. "Your presence in my life is gift enough." Elena felt her breath catch at the sincerity in his voice. This powerful, dangerous man was showing her a vulnerability she suspected few people ever witnessed. Their moment was interrupted by the sharp chime of Taehyun's secure phone. He stepped away to answer, his expression immediately shifting back to business mode as he listened to the caller. Elena watched his face change, saw the cold calculation return as he processed whatever information he was receiving. When he asked tersely, the caller's response made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "How many assets are compromised?" Another pause as he absorbed details Elena couldn't hear. "Initiate protection protocols immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Taehyun ended the call and turned to Elena, his expression grave. "I have to leave," he said. "There's a situation that requires my immediate attention." Elena felt a chill of premonition, though she couldn't say why the phone call had seemed so ominous. "Is everything all right?" she asked, though the answer was obvious from his tense posture and the way he was already mentally shifting into crisis management mode. Taehyun hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell her. "There are people who disapprove of some recent business decisions I've made," he said carefully. "They may try to express their displeasure through indirect methods." Elena understood the euphemism. Someone was targeting Taehyun's operations, and that could include anyone associated with him. "Are we safe?" she asked. By we, she meant herself and her mother, the civilians whose lives had become entangled with his dangerous world. "You are protected," Taehyun assured her. "This building has security measures you don't see, and my people are watching your mother's facility around the clock. But Elena, I need you to be extra careful for the next few weeks. Don't deviate from your normal routines without telling me. Don't meet with patients in unfamiliar locations. If anything seems unusual or concerning, call me immediately." Elena nodded, feeling the familiar tension of danger that she had hoped was behind her. The peaceful domestic evening they had shared suddenly seemed fragile and temporary, a brief respite in a world where violence was always waiting in the shadows. Taehyun moved toward the elevator, then stopped and returned to Elena. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her. "Your happiness matters to me. Your safety matters to me. You matter to me." Before Elena could respond, he kissed her forehead with the reverence of a benediction and was gone, leaving her alone in her beautiful apartment with the taste of possibility and the threat of danger hanging equally in the air. Elena stood at the window watching the city lights, her reflection overlapping with the urban landscape like a ghost caught between two worlds. 3 months ago, she had been a frightened waitress hiding bruises and counting tips. Tonight, she was a woman falling in love with a man whose protection came with its own deadly complications. She touched her throat where Marcus had cut her, then pressed her hand to her forehead where Taehyun had kissed her. The contrast between violence and tenderness, between her past terror and current security, reminded her how dramatically her life had changed. Somewhere in the city, forces were moving that would test the strength of Taehyun's protection and the depth of Elena's commitment to their arrangement. But for now, in this moment of quiet beauty high above the chaos below, Elena allowed herself to hope that the growing connection between them might be worth any price she would be asked to pay. Elena's secure phone shattered the peaceful silence of her morning routine at 6:47 a.m. She was preparing for an early nursing clinical rotation when Taehyun's name appeared on the screen. His voice was controlled, but carried an undertone of barely contained fury that made Elena's blood run cold. "Elena, listen carefully," he said without preamble. "Your mother was taken from the dialysis center 40 minutes ago. She is alive and unharmed, but she is being held as leverage against me. I need you to come to the secure location immediately. Do not stop for anything. Do not deviate from the route my driver will provide." Elena's coffee mug slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. The words didn't make sense at first, her mind refusing to process the impossible reality that her mother had been kidnapped. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking on the single syllable. "She is safe for now," Taehyun assured her, his tone gentling slightly. "But Elena, this is a direct attack on me using the people I protect. These are not amateurs or opportunists. This is organized retaliation from the Huang faction. They know exactly who your mother is and why taking her will affect me." Elena's legs gave out and she sank onto her living room couch, her whole body trembling with a terror that made Marcus's threats seem insignificant by comparison. Her mother was 72 years old, dependent on dialysis, completely innocent of any involvement in Elena's new world. The thought of her frightened and confused in the hands of violent criminals was unbearable. "My driver is in the lobby," Taehyun continued. "He will bring you to a secure facility where we can coordinate the response. Elena, I need you to stay calm and trust me. I will get your mother back safely. I promise you this." Elena grabbed her medical bag and ran for the elevator, her hands shaking so violently she could barely press the button. The ride down 30 floors felt like hours, each second stretching into eternity, while her mind conjured increasingly horrific scenarios of what might be happening to her mother. Taehyun's driver was waiting with the engine running, his face grim with urgency. Elena threw herself into the back seat as they pulled away from the building with swift efficiency. The driver navigated through morning traffic with the skill of someone accustomed to emergency situations, taking routes that avoided main thoroughfares and potential surveillance. They arrived at an unremarkable office building in an industrial district, but Elena noticed the subtle security measures as they entered. Cameras at every angle, reinforced glass, men in expensive suits who carried themselves like soldiers. This was one of Taehyun's command centers, a place where serious business was conducted away from public view. Taehyun was waiting in a conference room filled with monitors, maps, and communication equipment. Elena had never seen him like this before. Gone was the controlled businessman who brought her dinner and discussed her studies. This was a military commander preparing for war, his dark eyes cold with calculation and barely suppressed violence. Elena rushed to him, and he caught her in his arms, holding her steady as her composure finally cracked. "They took my mother," she sobbed against his chest. "She's old and sick and scared, and she doesn't understand any of this. They took her because of me, because of our arrangement. They took her because of me," Taehyun corrected firmly, his hand stroking Elena's hair with infinite gentleness. "This is retaliation for business decisions that have nothing to do with you. You are not responsible for the actions of desperate men who mistake cruelty for strategy." Elena pulled back to look at his face, seeing the controlled rage burning beneath his calm exterior. "What business decisions?" she asked. "What did you do that made them target innocent people?" Taehyun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Hwang faction has been trafficking young women through the port district, using my territory, without permission or compensation. I shut down their operations and liberated their victims. They consider this an unacceptable interference in their revenue stream." Elena felt a complex mix of pride and terror. Taehyun had risked this retaliation to save trafficked women, but now her mother was paying the price for his moral decision. "How do we get her back?" she asked, wiping tears from her cheeks. "We already know where she is being held," Taehyun said, gesturing toward one of the monitors displaying a warehouse layout. "My people have been tracking Hwang movements for weeks. They are using an abandoned refrigeration facility on the south side. 12 men guarding the perimeter, probably 4 more inside with your mother." Elena studied the tactical display, her nursing training helping her understand the medical implications of what Taehyun was planning. "Someone is going to get hurt," she said quietly. "Maybe killed. People are going to die because they took my mother." Taehyun's expression didn't change. "People are going to die because they made the mistake of threatening what belongs to me," he corrected. "This was their choice, Elena. They knew the consequences when they decided to escalate." Elena realized she was seeing Taehyun's true nature for the first time. Not the courteous businessman who discussed literature over dinner, but the criminal who had built an empire through violence and intimidation. The man who could make cars explode and people disappear was preparing to do exactly that to rescue her mother. "How long will it take?" she asked, accepting the reality that violence was the only solution to this situation. 2 hours to position assets and coordinate timing, Taehyun replied. "The actual operation will be over in minutes." Elena nodded, understanding that she would spend 2 hours imagining every possible disaster that could befall her mother while dangerous men prepared to risk their lives on her behalf. Taehyun assigned Elena to a secure room with communication equipment that would allow her to monitor the operation's progress. She sat surrounded by technology that could track every movement of the rescue team, but the waiting was agony. Every minute felt like an hour as she listened to coded radio chatter and watched moving dots on digital maps. 3.5 hours later, Taehyun's voice came through the speakers clear and calm. "Package secured. All hostile assets neutralized. Medical team standing by." Elena's mother was safe. Elena collapsed into her chair, the accumulated tension and fear finally overwhelming her nervous system. She had spent the entire day terrified that her decision to accept Taehyun's protection would result in her mother's death. The relief was so intense it left her dizzy and nauseous. When Taehyun returned to the facility, Elena threw herself into his arms with desperate gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered against his neck. "Thank you for saving her. Thank you for keeping your promise." Taehyun held her tightly, his own relief evident in the way his carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Your mother is being taken directly to the private medical facility, he said. She will receive the best possible care and remain under protection until we are certain there are no remaining threats. Elena pulled back to look at his face, noticing for the first time the exhaustion in his eyes and the tension in his jaw. This wasn't easy for you, was it? She observed. Planning something like this, ordering people to risk their lives. Taehyun led Elena to a quiet corner of the facility where they could talk privately. He looked older somehow, as if the day's events had aged him years in a matter of hours. No, he admitted quietly. It never gets easier. Every operation like this reminds me of my failures, of the people I couldn't protect when it mattered most. Elena sensed there was more behind his words, a story that explained the haunted look in his dark eyes. Tell me, she said gently. Whatever happened before, whatever makes this personal for you, I want to understand. Taehyun was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands as if seeing blood that would never wash clean. I had a younger sister, he said finally. Minji. She was everything good about our family, everything pure and innocent in a world that specializes in corrupting both. She was studying art history, dreaming of opening a gallery, completely removed from my business and the violence that came with it. Elena settled beside him, sensing the pain beneath his controlled voice. What happened to her? She asked softly. She met a man, Taehyun continued, his voice growing quieter. American, charming, everything she thought she wanted. He seemed perfect for her, supportive of her dreams, respectful of our family. I approved of the relationship because he made her happy. I was so focused on expanding my operations, on building power and influence, that I didn't notice the signs. Elena felt her heart breaking as she anticipated where the story was leading. He was abusing her, she said. For months, Taehyun confirmed. Subtle at first, then escalating to physical violence. She hid it well, made excuses, convinced herself it would get better. By the time I realized what was happening, she was completely isolated from everyone who might have helped her. He had made her dependent on him financially and emotionally. Elena understood the pattern intimately, having lived through her own version with Marcus. Why didn't she come to you for help? She asked. Because I was building an empire, Taehyun said with bitter self-recrimination. I was too busy consolidating territory and eliminating rivals to notice my sister was dying slowly in an abusive relationship. When she finally tried to leave him, he killed her rather than let her go. Made it look like a suicide. By the time I understood what had really happened, it was too late. Elena reached for Taehyun's hand, feeling the tremor of old grief beneath his controlled exterior. I'm so sorry, she whispered. That's why you recognized what Marcus was doing to me. That's why you intervened when you could have ignored it. Taehyun nodded, his dark eyes meeting Elena's with painful honesty. When I saw you flinch that night in the diner, when I saw the fear in your eyes and the way you tried to make yourself invisible, I saw Minji. I saw my chance to do what I failed to do for her. Protecting you became my way of protecting her memory. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she understood the depth of his commitment to her safety. You didn't save me just because you needed a medical consultant, she said. You saved me because I reminded you of your sister. At first, yes, Taehyun admitted. But Elena, somewhere in these past months, protecting you became about you, not about my guilt or my failures. Your happiness, your success, your safety, these things matter to me because you matter to me. Not as a substitute for Minji, but as yourself. Elena leaned closer to him, seeing vulnerability in his features that transformed his austere face into something achingly beautiful. I love you, she said quietly, the words emerging with startling clarity and certainty. Not because you protect me or provide for me, but because of who you are. Because you risk everything to save trafficked women. Because you remember my favorite foods and ask about my studies. Because you're gentle with me, even though you're capable of terrible violence. Taehyun cupped Elena's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears with infinite tenderness. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible. More than is probably safe for either of us. Elena realized that her fear for her mother's life had stripped away all pretense and revealed the truth of her feelings. She wasn't grateful to Taehyun or dependent on him. She loved him completely, with full knowledge of who he was and what their life together would entail. When Taehyun kissed her, it was with the desperate passion of two people who had faced the possibility of losing everything and discovered what truly mattered. Elena kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring months of growing affection and today's overwhelming relief into the contact. They held each other in the quiet aftermath of violence and revelation, two people from different worlds who had found something worth fighting for in each other. Elena knew that loving Taehyun would never be safe or simple, but she also knew that losing him would destroy her more completely than any external threat ever could. Elena spent the night at the medical facility where her mother was recovering, unable to sleep as she processed how close she had come to losing everything that mattered. Her mother was physically unharmed but shaken by the experience of being taken by strangers and held in an unknown location. Elena held her hand through the early morning hours, watching the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and thanking whatever forces had brought Taehyun into her life. When her mother finally fell into peaceful sleep, Elena stepped into the hallway where Taehyun waited with coffee and the patience of someone accustomed to keeping vigil. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and exhaustion lined his features. He had spent the entire night coordinating security measures and ensuring no other threats remained active. "How is she?" he asked quietly, handing Elena the coffee with the careful attention to her preferences that had become second nature to him over their months together. Elena accepted the warm cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma that reminded her of their peaceful dinners overlooking the city. "Scared but safe," Elena replied. "The doctors want to keep her for observation for another day, make sure the stress didn't affect her kidney function. She's asking questions about what happened, why anyone would want to hurt her. I don't know what to tell her about our arrangement, about your world." Taehyun considered this carefully. "Tell her the truth," he said finally. "That you work for me, that I protect the people who matter to my organization, and that she was targeted because of that protection. She doesn't need details about my business, but she deserves to understand why her safety is now permanently secured." Elena studied his face in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor. "You say permanently," she said. "What does that mean exactly? Are we talking about ongoing security measures, or have you eliminated the threat completely?" Taehyun's expression shifted into something cold and final. "The Hwang faction no longer exists as an operational entity," he said simply. "Their leadership has been permanently removed, their assets redistributed, their remaining members absorbed into other organizations under strict conditions. There will be no further retaliation because there is no one left to retaliate." Elena felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way he described what was essentially the destruction of an entire criminal organization. "How many people died because they threatened my mother?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Enough to ensure it never happens again," Taehyun replied. "Elena, in my world, mercy is often mistaken for weakness. Incomplete responses to threats create ongoing dangers. The only way to guarantee your safety and your mother's safety was to eliminate the threat completely and permanently." Elena understood the logic even as the moral implications overwhelmed her. Taehyun had orchestrated what amounted to a small war to protect her family, had ordered deaths and destruction because someone had dared to threaten the people he cared about. The scope of violence carried out on her behalf was staggering. "I can't live like this," she said quietly, setting down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "I can't be the reason people die. I can't have my mother's life hanging in the balance every time you make a business decision someone disagrees with. This is too much responsibility, too much risk, too much blood on my hands." Taehyun moved closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Elena, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing understanding and infinite patience in his dark gaze. "You are not responsible for the choices violent men make. You are not responsible for the consequences they face when they threaten innocence. The blood is on my hands, where it belongs." "But I chose this," Elena protested. "I accepted your arrangement, entered your world, put my family at risk by association with you. If I had just stayed in my old life, worked my waitress job, found another way to pay for my mother's care, none of this would have happened." Taehyun's expression hardened slightly. "If you had stayed in your old life, Marcus would have sold you to pay his debts, and your mother would have died when her dialysis treatments became unaffordable," he said bluntly. There was no safe path forward from where you were, Elena. There were only different kinds of danger, different forms of dependence. Elena knew he was right, but the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her like a physical burden. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you, but of what loving you means. Of the prices other people pay for my safety. Of how easily everything I care about can be threatened. Taehyun pulled Elena into his arms, holding her against his chest, while she finally let herself cry for everything she had gained and everything it had cost. I'm scared too, he admitted quietly. Scared of how much you matter to me. Scared of what I would become if anything happened to you. Scared that my world will eventually destroy the things about you that I love most. They stood together in the sterile hospital corridor, two people who had found something precious in the midst of violence and uncertainty. Elena felt the steady beat of Taehyun's heart against her cheek, the solid strength of his arms around her, the careful way he held her as if she were infinitely valuable and equally fragile. When Elena finally pulled back, she saw her own fears reflected in Taehyun's eyes. But she also saw something else. Determination, possessiveness, the absolute certainty of a man who had decided that some things were worth any price. I can't live without you, she realized aloud. Even knowing the risks, even understanding what your protection costs, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Taehyun cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with reverent tenderness. Then don't, he said simply. Don't live without me. Be mine completely, Elena. Not just as part of our arrangement, not just as a business partner, but as my woman, my family, my future. Elena felt her breath catch at the intensity in his voice, at the raw need beneath his controlled exterior. She had fallen in love with his gentleness, his unexpected domesticity, his careful attention to her happiness. But this was the other side of that devotion. The possessive hunger of a man who protected what he claimed with absolute ruthlessness. What are you asking me? She whispered, though she thought she knew the answer. I'm asking you to marry me, Taehyun said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the request. Not as a condition of our arrangement, but because I cannot imagine building a future without you. I want you as my wife, my partner in everything, the woman who bears my name and shares my life completely. Elena stared at him in shock. Marriage meant permanence, legal and social ties that went far beyond their current agreement. It meant accepting his world completely, becoming part of his organization not just as an employee, but as family. It meant that any future threats would target her not just as his associate, but as his wife. But it also meant security for her mother, completion of her nursing degree, and a future with a man she loved beyond all rational consideration. It meant belonging somewhere, being protected and valued and cherished by someone with the power to make those promises real. You're mine, Taehyun continued, his hands still framing her face with infinite care. I know you felt it the moment you called me from your apartment. I know you feel it now when I touch you, when I promise to protect you, when I eliminate threats to your safety. You belong with me, Elena. Elena felt something shift inside her at his words, a recognition of truth she had been fighting for months. She did belong with him, had belonged with him since the night he saved her from Marcus and offered her a different kind of future. The fear, the moral complications, the violence that surrounded their relationship, none of it changed the fundamental reality that she was his and he was hers. Yes, she said quietly, the word emerging with startling clarity. Yes, I'm yours. And you're mine, Kim Taehyun. All of you, the gentleman who brings me dinner, the criminal who eliminates threats, the man who still grieves his sister, the protector who would destroy the world to keep me safe. Taehyun's control finally cracked completely. He kissed Elena with desperate passion, months of careful restraint finally giving way to the hunger that had been building between them. Elena kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his dark hair as she pressed closer to the warmth and strength of his body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Taehyun rested his forehead against Elena's. I love you, he said, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. I love your strength, your intelligence, your compassion for people who don't deserve it. I love the way you trust me even when you're afraid, the way you see the man I am beneath everything else. I love you too, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. I love that you're gentle with me, but ruthless with anyone who threatens what you protect. I love that you remember my mother's medical appointments and my favorite foods and the things that make me laugh. I love that you turned your guilt over your sister into something that saves other people. They spent the rest of the morning planning a future that seemed impossible just hours earlier. Taehyun explained his legitimate business interests, the real estate and import companies that provided legal income and respectable cover for his other activities. Elena would finish her nursing degree and take over medical operations for the entire organization, establishing a private clinic that could serve both his associates and the broader community. Her mother would live in a secure care facility with round-the-clock medical support and protection. Elena's wedding would announce to every criminal organization in the city that she was not just under Taehyun's protection, but part of his family, making any future threats unthinkably costly for potential enemies. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the private chapel of Taehyun's ancestral estate, wearing a dress that had cost more than her previous annual salary. The ceremony was small but elegant, attended by associates who managed Taehyun's legitimate businesses and a carefully selected group of family members who understood the significance of what they were witnessing. Elena's mother sat in the front row. Her color improved dramatically since receiving the kidney transplant that Taehyun had arranged through his medical connections. She still didn't fully understand her daughter's new world, but she could see the happiness in Elena's eyes and the protective devotion in Taehyun's careful attention to her needs. The vows they exchanged were traditional in form, but weighted with meaning that went far beyond conventional promises. When Taehyun promised to protect and cherish Elena, everyone present understood that he was making those commitments with the full force of his organization behind them. When Elena promised to support and stand by Taehyun, she was accepting not just his love, but his world with all its dangers and moral complexities. The reception was held in gardens that overlooked the city where their relationship had begun. Elena moved through conversations with people who treated her with the respect accorded to the wife of a powerful man, accepting congratulations and promises of loyalty from associates who would now protect her as an extension of protecting Taehyun. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Elena and Taehyun found themselves alone on a terrace overlooking the lights of the city spread out below them like scattered jewels. Elena leaned against the stone railing, still amazed by how far she had traveled from the frightened waitress hiding bruises and counting tips toward an impossible escape fund. "Do you regret it?" Taehyun asked quietly, joining her at the railing. His formal wedding attire had been replaced by a simple shirt and slacks, but he still looked every inch the powerful man who commanded respect through capability and controlled violence. Elena considered the question seriously. She thought about Marcus and the terror of that night in her apartment, about her mother's kidnapping and the violence that had followed, about all the moral compromises she had made to reach this moment of safety and love. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret loving you. I don't regret accepting your protection. I don't even regret the prices other people paid for threatening what you care about." Taehyun moved closer, his arms encircling Elena from behind as they both gazed out at the city lights. "You understand what this marriage means," he said. "Not just the emotional commitment, but the practical realities. You're part of my organization now, my family, my legacy. Any threats against you become threats against everything I've built." Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid strength of the man who had transformed her life completely. "I understand," she said, "and I accept it all. The protection, the responsibilities, the knowledge that your enemies will always be watching for weaknesses they can exploit." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found something worth fighting for in each other. Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from that first night in the diner when Taehyun had noticed her fear and decided to intervene. She had been looking for an escape from Marcus and poverty, but she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found belonging, purpose, and a love that would reshape both their lives. The city spread out below them held no more terror for Elena. She was no longer the vulnerable woman counting tips and hiding bruises, hoping for enough money to disappear into anonymity. She was Mrs. Kim Taehyun, protected by resources she could barely comprehend, loved by a man who would move heaven and earth to ensure her safety and happiness. When Taehyun turned her in his arms and kissed her with the passion of a man claiming his bride, Elena kissed him back with the confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world. They had built something beautiful from violence and desperation, had found light in the darkest corners of human nature. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new moral complexities to navigate. But tonight, high above the city where their story had begun, Elena was exactly where she belonged. Safe in the arms of the dangerous man who had saved her life and given her a future beyond anything she had ever dared to dream.